Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our annual meeting. I'm Brenda Dater, Executive Director at AANE. I'm so happy to have autistic adults, teens, family members, staff, board members, and volunteers here tonight. This annual meeting provides an opportunity for us to gather virtually to discuss a topic of community-wide interest. This year's topic is Autistic Joy. When I started working in early intervention over 30 years ago, none of my training focused on autistic culture or joy. In order for autistic people to be able to be their authentic selves in more places, we need to continue to expand people's understanding of autism as not only a difference, diagnosis, or disability, but as a culture too. In my professional life, working in the disability, social work, and public health fields, one of the core values is providing culturally competent services. That means taking an individual's culture into account in the design, delivery, and evaluation of any program or service. This philosophy is at the core of our programming at AANE. It is my great pleasure to introduce our panel this evening. All our AANE staff, and we greatly benefit from having their perspective and lived experience guide our work. Ryan Walsh will be moderating our panel. Participants on the panel include Jay Eveson-Egler, Mina Fonzie, and Bob Waters. Thank you all for sharing your expertise with us tonight. Ryan, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Brenda. Hi, everybody. We're so happy to have you here today. If you'll just give me a moment, I'm going to share the slides, although I think, yes, I'm going to share. I just need permission to share the screen.
Sure thing. I will do that.
Sorry, everyone, just a moment.
Actually, Erica, are you able to do that? I think I can as the co-host, but you might be able to as the host.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Roll over Ryan's name and make him a co-host, please.
Thank you for everyone for bearing with our technical stuff here.
Great. Ryan, let me know if that works for you.
Yes, it does. Great. Okay, awesome. So today we are having a conversation about Autistic Joy with our panelists here. Very happy to have our panelists here, and also very happy that you guys are here today to see this presentation and this panel. And I hope that you enjoy it. So first, we are just going to talk about our agenda. So first, we're going to meet our panelists, and we're going to go through a few different questions with the panelists, and we are going to try to cover a bunch of different topics pertaining to Autistic Joy. And then we're going to be doing a brief period for question and answer. So if you do have a question that you want us to answer, we're going to save all of our questions for the end. But if you do think of a question, feel free to write it in the chat, and then I will take note of it, and we will answer as many questions as we can as time permits at the end of the presentation. My name is Ryan Walsh. I'm a neurodiversity training specialist at AANE. I have been at AANE for 2 years as an official employee, but I've been speaking with AANE for about 10 years now. And now we can hand it over to our panelists.
Hi, my name is Jay Eveson-Egler. I'm the co-manager of Simpatico, which is a peer-to-peer mentorship program where we pair autistic adults to autistic adults in mentorship settings. I am an autistic parent, assault advocate, and current program manager, as I mentioned. I've been with AANE for about 1.5 years, and always happy to do this sort of thing. I've had a diverse array of experience as a one-on-one community companion, teacher, recruiter, kind of everything under the sun. I really like to focus on LGBTQ issues, peer connections, and parenthood. I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old and have known I'm autistic for quite a while. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and education.
Great, thank you. And now Mina.
Hi, my name is Mina. I am an admin coordinator at AANE. I just started, I believe, last November. I am late and recently diagnosed. I was diagnosed about 1.5 years ago at 32. So my perspective on Autistic Joy is a little different, perhaps, than some of our other panelists. I'm a total word nerd. I'm hyperlexic, so I started reading at a very, very young age. It's one of my favorite things to do. I love horror movies, Bob's Burgers. I like to cook. I have a wide array of interests, and I'm really excited to be here and talk with you all today.
Thank you. And Bob?
Hi, yeah, thank you, Ryan. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Bob Waters. I use he, him pronouns. My title here at the A&E is I'm the LifeNet Client Support / Admin Coordinator. But in addition to that, I also work here in the training department, sometimes in individual and family services, and other various ways of helping out neurodivergent folks. Let's see, I'm just rereading my own bio. Yeah, I have a deep commitment to ensuring that neurodivergent people have access to professional, academic, and personal lives that are fulfilling, healthy, and secure. I used to work at the Next Step College Living Preparedness Program, which is a great program for anyone who has transition-aged high school level folks in the Boston area, and do workshops. Yes, I graduated with my BA in History and Theater from Clark. I love to sing, write, attend live theater, take piano lessons, and watch documentaries. And I'm happy to be here as well. Oh yes, and I was diagnosed when I was 11 years old.
Thank you, Bob. So now we're going to get into our panelist questions. We're going to try to get through all of it in the time that we have, and then also save some time for questions. So as you're hearing the panelists talk, feel free to write your questions in the chat, and I will take care of them. So first, we're going to start with this question. With the introductions, we kind of already broached this a little bit, but we're going to talk about now. I want to pose to the panelists, what is your connection to the autism community?
Are we just jumping on in, Ryan?
Yeah. Anybody who wants to jump in first. Maybe we'll go with Bob first.
Sure. I think about this question about the autism community in two ways. So when I hear the words the autistic community, I think about the community of autistic people talking about autism, neurodiversity, advocacy, all of those wonderful things. There's a whole lot of wonderful authors and writers and bloggers that we partner with at A&E. We had a wonderful talk with Dr. Devin Price about a month ago. I think of people like Steve Silberman, things like that. And the other thing I think of is cultural sort of zones that are predominantly populated by autistic or neurodivergent people, whether diagnosed or not. I'm sure many of you in this chat can think about communities that you participate in that are predominantly neurodivergent. I can think of fandoms or sometimes more technical fields, but it's not even reduced to specific sort of archetypes. It's any place where autistic people can find connection and community. That's how I think about it.
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, like I mentioned, I was diagnosed when I was 8 years old, but I wouldn't say that I really became a part of the autistic community really until I was much older and I was finding my community. And I wrote an article a few months ago on autistic people as community builders and how oftentimes spaces such as what Bob mentioned, including fandom, spaces are sort of these cultural centers for autistic people, and that's how we find our community oftentimes. And I found my community through role playing, and then became more acquainted with more autistic self-advocacy sort of ideals and self-acceptance and things like that through those communities.
Yeah, I think part of the joy of sort of having my diagnosis is feeling empowered to seek out, more autistic people and be in community with other autistic people. And just to, sort of piggyback on what some of my fellow panelists have said, I find that we sort of find each other in the wild in a lot of ways. I don't necessarily have several friends with autism diagnosed, but I sure have a lot of friends with ADHD. And we tend to have kind of shared specific and sort of deep interests in a lot of the same things. So like for me, I love animation. I've always loved animation, and turns out there's a lot of other adults that love animation are also autistic. So I think it's about finding community with people that you connect with, whether they're autistic or not, and really willing to sort of share a space with someone that shares the same interests that they do.
Just making sure I'm unmuted. Thank you everybody for your input on this. Is there anything anybody else wants to kind of include about themselves and their connection to the community before we move on to the next? Okay, cool. So I'm going to go on to the next one here. So now we're going to get into the kind of main part of the topic, introducing the topic. What does autistic joy mean to you? And I can pick someone to start, or Bob, looks like you're unmuting, so you can just jump in.
Sure. Yeah. I think in Brenda's introduction, she spelled out what I think it means to me. Some of you might have heard similar phrases: Black joy, queer joy, other forms of joy. I think to me, it fights back against this idea that autism equals suffering. So when you hear a phrase like Black joy or queer joy, it's saying like, oh, well, this idea that Blackness and all that it is suffering. That's not true. Same thing with queerness. It's not just suffering. And autism is not just suffering. I consider my autism not to be an illness. And this is also a very important part of demedicalizing neurodivergence, which is something that we advocate very strongly here at AANE. My autism is a neutral fact about me. It is me. The suffering in my life comes from mental health conditions that have arisen because of my incongruence with a lot of what's expected of me in a neurotypically designed world. But my autism itself is not a lesser humanity, is not a broken thing. It's not an illness in that respect. And because of that, like, there is a lot of joy in my life that is lived autistically. Something that I was talking about, I think with you guys actually last week. I love staying up late at night, just going through articles on Wikipedia or like watching documentaries on YouTube in a way that like other people, like, or in a neurotypical design like framework, would be like, oh, that's how you spend a lot of your time. But for me, it's very joyful. I love connecting the dots of different things I love learning things. I love talking about the things that I'm learning in a way, and I did as a child as well, in a way that like wouldn't be considered like neurotypically appropriate or whatever. But to me, that was life. To me, that was my expression of being a human being. All of us can take each moment at face value of, oh, I'm a human being. This is what being alive is. And for me, that experience is autistic. And my joy is also autistic. And celebrating that and finding space to not have shame about the joy you experience autistically or the other human experiences that you live autistically is a wonderful way of going about thinking about autism, especially in the future we're all constructing of demedicalizing it.
Yeah, and I guess to me, like, there's several different layers. Like, autistic joy is any joy that you perceive yourself as feeling as an autistic person. Sometimes it can be things that make you joyful because you're autistic. So like maybe there's a texture of something that feels good. And while that's not that's a little bit general to say that only autistic people feel immense joy when they have some sort of like sensory euphoria from something like a nice texture or a nice sound or just a nice stim. But I think it's a pretty unique experience to the autistic community, and that we can share, most of us can share in that. So there's that, like a shared joy that we can kind of, that the most of us can relate to, that we perceive as being a part of our autism or a part of ourselves, because as Bob put it, you can't really separate that. And then I guess like the last thing for me is like the joy and being able to express that joy in a way that is loud and profound and in the way that makes sense most for you. Because I think so often as autistic people, we're taught to dampen our joy. We're told that we're too loud, we're too rambunctious, or that we come across as aggressive when we're passionate about something, when something brings us joy. And just letting go and allowing yourself to feel that joy is autistic joy.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of what Jay was saying, since my diagnosis is so recent, I have spent, the vast majority of my life feeling really misunderstood and feeling as if, the world and the people around me were really expecting me to express myself and my interests in a really specific way that was never authentic to me, and was deeply uncomfortable and really led to a lot of repression. So in my sort of post-diagnosis journey, I'm at a point now where I'm really starting to explore, like, what does joy look like for me? What brings me that level of joy that I sort of shied away from for so long because the expression wasn't welcome. And I find joy currently in a lot of really little things. Like, I'm an avid reader. I've always been a big reader, but for years, it just really wasn't something I had access to for a litany of reasons. I was uncomfortable with myself. I was uncomfortable in my own head. There was just so much sort of like trauma built up at that point that even having access to my imagination in a way that allows reading to be such an escape for me wasn't really something that was available for a long time. And sort of through, unpacking my life now under this new sort of lens that makes a lot of sense to me, I've been able to access a lot of those things that made me feel joyful before. And reading is an easy one for me to point to, because for years I was only reading really like 3 or 4 books a year, which is not at all in line with how I read in my childhood. And this year, I am so close to finishing 16 books already, and it feels so joyful to reconnect with that part of myself, even though it is something that is a more quiet kind of private hobby. I think it's a signal to me that sort of allowing myself the space to explore my feelings and joy and do it the way that feels comfortable and most right for me is completely changing the way that I move through my life and my interests and everything else.
Thank you. I think everybody really, covered this topic very, very holistically. So I don't know if I have anything to add for this one, but, thank you guys for covering it so well. The next topic is why are we talking about autistic joy today? What's the purpose in it? And what do you feel that people need to be made aware of about autistic joy?
Yeah, but I hope, Bob, you don't mind if I jump in real quick. You actually mentioned something, Bob, earlier that kind of alluded to this, but I think so often the idea that people have of what autism looks like and how people expect autistic people to act is based on how we are when we're completely dysregulated, when we're at our worst. Really what we see, I think, in terms of what people are looking for when not even just diagnosing autism, but really what they're looking for and expecting when they encounter an autistic person is all based on trauma. And really, you don't really get untraumatized autistic people. Our society doesn't really produce autistic people that are untraumatized. But because that stereotype persists, people don't understand or don't see that autistic people do experience joy, or they don't understand that how we experience joy. So many, like, I've encountered people that would say that an autistic person's hand flapping, for instance, was a sign of distress, when for that person they would have turned around and said, no, it means I'm happy. So I think it's really important to talk about this topic because it's not addressed enough.
I'll jump in. I totally agree with everything that Jay just said. I think having gone through the diagnostic process recently and as an adult, the entire thing, almost the entire thing, is focused on finding deficits, finding and addressing and parsing out, what is trauma and CPTSD and what is autism. And I think that in and of itself is really telling that this is a discussion I've kind of been seeing in autism spaces that I'm in online, where because the diagnostic criteria is so focused on these deficits or perceived deficits, can a person who is autistic and doing well still be considered autistic? Because the entire conversation is always around, support needs, and all of those things are very important. I'm not in any way trying to minimize the impact of some of these issues that we all face, but I think speaking specifically about Autistic Joy and the fact that autism is full of joyful moments, just like a neurotypical life is full of joyful moments, is something that just, it's worth spending some time just to kind of bring light to and discuss, because I think it so often gets overlooked, and then we end up looking at autism and autistic people as sort of these fragmented ideas of a whole person rather than just a unique individual.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. Why talk about Autistic Joy today? I think both me and Jay covered, I think almost all the basics. The only thing I feel like adding is, I'm trying to remember it. In Dr. Price's book, that I mentioned, there was an exercise that really stuck out to me. It was like, imagine a life where you aren't like, I don't know if either of you remember it, but like, imagine a life where you don't have to try so hard, like you just are yourself. And it was this shockingly vulnerable experience. It was like, people talk about masking and unmasking, and for so many autistic people, especially autistic people who sort of are labeled as high functioning and pass in many ways in a neurotypical world, there's this like, oh, it just went away. Brains, we all have them. We all have brains. Whatever I was going to say went away. But yeah, thank you so much, both of you.
Well, I think what you had to say was still very valuable, so no worries, Bob. Yeah, I think that it's really important that we have this conversation, because again, just calling attention to the idea that there's this whole other side of it, because it's so often coming from this deficit space. So calling attention to that, I think, is really important. And so I think that this might also help some of the people in the chat here. But how might the experience of joy differ for autistic people versus other kinds of people? Is there something unique about autistic joy when compared to other kinds of joy? Is it the same? Is it different? And that answer might be different for all of you. So,
Do you mind if I jump in first, Ryan?
yeah, go ahead.
First major thing that sticks out to me is that someone does not have to check all of the neurotypicality boxes to be a successful person and to be happy. And like, that could mean a whole lot of things. That could mean maybe someone doesn't achieve this like mythologized independence where they make a lot of money and have sexual and romantic relationships and talk a certain way that they're expected to, and make people feel comfortable or uncomfortable in different environments or whatever. Like what Mina was saying in the last question, people are not incomplete human beings. So often with like clients that I work with, that we work with, there's this constant struggle of living in the future tense. Oh my God, like when I'm a real adult, like when I make money, when I move out, when I get a girlfriend, when I am cool, when I this, when I that. And that process never stops in a person until they accept where they are right now. There's always, oh, well, when I'm this, when I'm that, when I'm this, when I'm that, when I'm this, when I'm that. the moment you're happy and the moment that you are at peace with what is in your life is the moment where you say, whatever's happening right now is acceptable. And the radical thing is that you can do that even if you don't fit a mold of what is neurotypically expected of you at your age, at your whatever. And that's really hard for a lot of folks because they still have this heroic narrative script of, well, I'm not a real person yet. When I'll be a real person when I do this. And your mental health will not be in a place of peace if that engine of not accepting yourself never goes away.
Yeah, Bob, I think that was really impactful for some of the people in the chat here, and I could say it was impactful as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think in terms of how autistic people might experience joy differently from like our neurotypical peers, I think one of the things that comes to mind, and one of the things that I had to kind of relearn and refocus and came to really appreciate, is that a lot of people don't allow themselves to be happy with the little things. Like they don't allow themselves to feel pleasure from the tiny things in life, like the texture of a really soft pillow, or the smell of a really good coffee. Like, yeah, they'll be like, oh, this is a momentary point of like, yeah, that smells really good, but they're not gonna allow themselves to feel that kind of joy because they've learned through societal pressures since they were a little kid that that's not socially acceptable. And for many autistic people, we still find these things overly enjoyable, like very enjoyable. I know a lot of people, like going back to that point of like how we focus a lot on the deficits when it comes to autistic narratives on sensory avoidance, for instance. And I think there's too little focus on things like sensory seeking behavior. Like I find immense joy in those slime videos that you kind of sometimes see on TikTok or YouTube. Like I find immense joy in like the different textures of slime, and some people would avoid that, but I really seek that out. And the joy and calm that I feel when I'm playing with some new slime with like some neat crunchy bits in it and the sound that it makes, I think allowing yourself to feel that joy in an immense way, one, is an expression of that autistic joy, but two, I think it is something uniquely autistic to just be able to sit there and allow yourself to feel enjoyment from the little things in life, the things that don't just start to blend into the background because you got older. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Bob and Jay both brought up really, really good points. I'm going to take it a little more literally, perhaps. I think it sort of stands to reason, right, that if autistic people are more prone to meltdowns and have sort of what some people may consider more extreme emotional reactions to certain things, it stands to reason that joy would work the same way, right? That the feelings of joy can be so profound and so deep from such small things. Like for me, one of the things is when I find a new song that I really like and it has like a super killer bass line or whatever, I can listen to that song over and over and over and over again. And to people, outside of my brain, that could potentially look really disordered and weird, right? Like, I also have OCD. So kind of like looking for that sort of thing is an important part of the people around me to kind of try to make sure I'm taking care of myself. But it's such a deeply soothing and joyful experience when you connect to something really small like that and it's accessible to you over and over again, and the joy really isn't lost. I mean, other small things that come to mind are like this blanket I have in my living room is a polar fleece blanket, and it's so soft, and I just like every night can kind of like rub my hands over it, and it never gets old, and I love it, and it feels good, and it may sort of look goofy for somebody to be doing that, but it feels good. The one other thing that I kind of continue to come back to in this conversation is I was having a really hard time in high school, because everyone has a hard time in high school, and I was undiagnosed autistic in the early 2000s, so that wasn't awesome. But I had a friend of mine, I was venting to her about how frustrating it is that when I feel things, it seems to be so like all encompassing and enormous, and I didn't really know what to do with that. And this has stuck with me since then. She said, it's really painful to watch you go through hard things because you do feel them so deeply, and it affects you so much. But you also feel joy in a way that I know I won't ever experience, because I don't feel that I have the same capacity for that level of emotion that you do. And when you're 15 and your best friend tells you something like that, it really was like a pivotal moment in my life to sort of, in those moments where it's sort of maybe even the joy felt overwhelming, to be able to kind of sit back and be like, but what a privilege to be able to sort of lean into feelings in that intense of a way, and be able to experience life in sort of technicolor in that way, I think is perhaps a specific thing for autistic people, and really specific to Autistic Joy as well.
Yeah, I think that is, I think that first of all, that definitely highlights how I think Autistic Joy can be a bit different, and really hones in on what we're talking about here. And I think you all really shared really like crucial pieces of that I think I found to be relatable myself as an autistic person. And I'm seeing a lot of people here also finding it to be very relatable. And some of what you guys have said here just off the rip, like outside of our other conversations, has just been really awesome. So just moving on here, what are some misconceptions about Autistic Joy? What are some preconceived notions people may have about Autistic Joy that could potentially be harmful or just misunderstood?
That it doesn't exist, that I think, Mina, as you mentioned, like that intense feeling that I've actually had professionals and clinicians that I've worked with in the past tell me that because it's felt so intensely, it can be debilitating and overwhelming. And so they seek to try and, restrict how they express it, in the hopes that that'll somehow do something. But why restrict joy, So yeah, those are some of the misconceptions that I've certainly come across.
Another misconception that I definitely see is that like, and you touched on this, Jay, but like that things that make an individual autistic person happy or content, or something that they focus on a lot, are like harmful or detrimental to their like journey to independence. So like you come across the word independence a lot in like autism study, and I much prefer the word interdependence. No one is actually independent. We all live in like a network of mutuality, right? But at the same time, there's this, I touched on it earlier, this sort of heroic narrative of finally achieving independence, right? Finally, you'll be self-sufficient, you'll be this, you'll be that, you'll be these, and there's like certain key markers that like are thought of. And it's like, oh, well, this thing that my child likes or my student likes, that, they spend all of their time doing, is like preventing them from working on, the stuff they need to work on in order to be like a real successful adult, right? And even if someone doesn't explicitly say this to that person, their attitudes and their assumptions are come across very strongly, and that can cause, especially for like a child, can cause a whole host of, oh, like what I am isn't good enough. And that's a huge tragedy, that facilitation of mistrust of oneself, and teaching someone that who they naturally are is inadequate. Even if you say the opposite, if your actions are contributing to that, that causes a lot of the damage and stuff to help that we see in our clients. And what Jay said, that it doesn't exist. Yes, autism is not just suffering.
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions that I suffered from before I was diagnosed and really started like ingratiating myself into the community is that autistic joy is very like relegated to specific niches, you know, like the stereotype of all autistic people love trains. And like, listen, I love trains. I'm not saying that's not the case for me in particular, but you know, things that bring autistic people joy run the gamut, just like neurotypical people. And there's all sorts of different things that bring people joy. Like I brought up earlier that horror movies are like one of my absolute favorite things. And I love the concepts of them. I love creature creation. I love special effects. I love practical effects. Like everything that goes into making a horror movie is fascinating to me. And I think for a really long time, I thought that, you know, autistic joy was like the Rain Man stereotype, you know, like we all like to do math and we all like to, you know, whatever, do these sorts of things. And that just so is not the case. And, you know, wherever you might find neurotypical people doing something, you will find autistic people there finding joy in the same experience. So I think that, yeah, one of the misconceptions about it is just kind of trying to put people in a box of what autism looks like or should look like or what have you. And back to the point again that we're all whole individual people, and there isn't something that is just for autistic people or just for neurotypical people, and you can find autistic people being joyful everywhere, really, if you know what to look for.
One thing that I think is really interesting to talk about too when it comes to misconceptions is like, you know, like the idea that the expression of joy and that the joy itself are the same thing, because there's like the experience of feeling joy internally, and then there's the experience of like how that is seen by the rest of the world, because there's a lot of like masking and like mitigation that goes into because there's, you know, the idea that if I overly express my joy, then everybody's going to see that I'm too joyful, and then I can't have that. So I think that, you know, we talk a lot about the intense feeling of the joy, but an autistic person may be experiencing that intense feeling of joy, but you might see nothing. And so like if a person's just telling you that they're joyful, but they don't look joyful, I think that it's important to keep in mind that like it can be expressed in a bunch of different ways. And I think that you guys touched on that and like in different ways in the way you responded to that. But I wanted to bring that up as a misconception also, because I think that can be really useful for some people. Just to move on to the next question, and this is a big question, and I know you guys are going to have a great answer for it, which is how can we create spaces that empower autistic folks to express joy authentically? You know, again, getting into that idea of like autistic people are going to mask their expression of joy.
I don't really think that you can really encourage or discourage unmasking or things like that, because it's ultimately up to the individual. But I think giving people that safety net of being open about the way that they express anything is kind of going to be important. And I think one of the most critical ways when it comes to joy is like to take a step back in any conversation that you have with anybody. That doesn't matter, because you know, ultimately, for a lot of people, you just don't know. But it's taking a step back and recognizing, you know, if you're perceiving this person as aggressive or something, or coming on too strong, is this just passion? Is this just joy? Is going to be really important. And to really, when you find yourself wanting to tone police somebody and like adjust their tone or adjust the way that they're like, you're uncomfortable with the way that they're moving their body, understand like that this might be someone else's way of expressing themselves and communicating something to you. And that expression of joy, if they're expressing that level of joy to you and you react negatively, is going to put them automatically in this unsafe space of like, oh, I have to mask around you. So the first step is always addressing this in every interaction that you have with anybody about just how are you responding to it? Is just going through and thinking, is this person like this because this might be something they're passionate about or joyful about? Am I tone policing them when I shouldn't be? That sort of thing.
A big one that I can think of is making sure that shame is not generally used as a social tool just across the board in general. I often talk a lot in our trainings about creating what I call positive mental health, like hygiene infrastructure. So this idea is that we think of mental health as people having crises and you have to fix it. And oh my God, all of our emergency rooms are overloaded. When really, if you think about it like toilets and cholera, right? Someone can get cholera and you can treat them for cholera. You can rehydrate them, you can give them electrolytes. But if you have like toilets in every building and then no one gets cholera, then you've done preventative hygiene infrastructure. And we're at the like 18th century no toilets anywhere level of hygiene, like public investment hygiene when it comes to mental health. If you do like across the board promoting good mental health skills everywhere for like tiny children across all cultures, whatever, a lot of this stuff will be easier. If you dismantle sort of the mechanisms of introducing sort of compulsory shame throughout life, a lot of that stuff becomes easier, as what Jay was just saying about like you're less likely to come into opportunities of like, oh, I can't be safe around this person. Another important thing I think is to not associate like conformative presentation with like maturity. That's a big one, both like from a childhood perspective and also from a like culture. I keep reading articles about how so much of the in like in the United States, like a stereotypical like strict like no expressing emotions, no big dances, no big things, is because of early days of colonization when people came into like Europeans came into contact with like Native American like groups or different African groups through the transatlantic slave trade. And in a lot of these cultures, big expressions of emotion or big body movements or big just expressions of being human are normal and are not considered shameful and are not considered like just for children, right? A lot of these ideas are interconnected, and associating sort of a stiff professional costume with all of these sort of aspirational qualities like adulthood or maturity is profoundly damaging. You don't need to not be a joyful person to be successful.
Yeah, I think just kind of Bob and Jade really covered my thoughts on it pretty well. I think like just as an action point for someone who may be listening to this and wondering like, well, where do I start with that? I think really paying attention and just getting into the habit and practice of noticing social niceties and these other sort of behaviors that we reinforce in people, especially in the United States. Like the first step is really just being aware that that's happening and being able to notice kind of in real time, like, oh, I don't really like that my boss just said this to my coworker, or, you know, it kind of strikes me as odd that my child's teacher said this thing about this and that there was only one correct way to do something, or that something was inappropriate that, you know, wasn't actually harming anyone. I think, yeah, just a really good jumping off point is to just try to make a practice of being aware of what these systems are and how we all kind of reinforce them in our own ways. And once you kind of start getting into a habit of looking at those things, they become a lot easier to notice, and it becomes much clearer over time which ones are damaging and how. And that's not to say that they're all universally bad. It's just that they can't be universally applied. So I think really just kind of starting to deconstruct what you perceive as polite and polite culture, and that sort of, you know, the soft social skills that they sort of expect everyone to have in a workplace and whatnot, just sort of thinking about them and really taking time to kind of like sit with them and really think about how they're at play in your personality and in your life can really jumpstart like a huge evolution in a person. And I say that because I had to go through that myself. So it's an exciting thing to grow through, but it is kind of tricky to start. And I think that is where I would recommend people kind of, that's the jumping off point if you're looking to kind of deconstruct this in yourself.
So that was our last question for the panelist questions here. I think you guys did an awesome job and had an awesome conversation that I'm always glad to be able to have conversations with you guys. So now what I want to do is I want to move into some questions that were asked in the audience. I think we'll be able to get to all of the questions. And I think that, you know, I'm sure people will ask questions here, but we'll try to get to as many as we can before we have to end it off. So our first question is, how it is, maybe provide a little bit more of a definition for joy and like, what is joy versus happiness? Just from like a logistical perspective, because I think that we had a few, people in the chat saying that they were confused to kind of like about specifically what joy means in this context, like outside of being autistic joy.
Yeah, I guess for me, the difference would be that like happiness is something that's a lot quieter and a lot more subtle. Like it's something that I like, an overarching feeling that occurs throughout the day for me, whereas like joy is specifically when I'm in a state of mind where the things I'm doing just bring me like this almost euphoric sense of joy. Like I'm excited. I'm almost like, I think somebody mentioned earlier was like, somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, I saw about perseverance, and like a lot of clinical people would define things like autistic joy as perseverance because we engage with the things that bring us joy over and over and over again. Because it's joyful. It's not just happiness. It's not just like the underlying feeling of contentment. It is joyful. It gets us going. It gets us motivated. It gets us moving. It gets us communicating with other people. It's something that really affects us in a much, it's like a larger emotion. Yeah.
I think I agree with what Jay said, and just to kind of maybe contextualize it a little more, to me, I think the term happy is kind of loaded nowadays. I think like this sort of idea that once you reach happiness, you are a happy person, and that is like your MO 90% of the time, is something that we've kind of culturally glommed onto, and I just don't think that's accurate. I think joy is more specific, I guess, to me than happiness. Like happiness to me feels like sort of a general state of being, whereas joy feels like something that I can seek out in a daily way. You know, like I can buy extra toasted Cheez-Its, and like that brings me joy to have a box full of only the extra toasted Cheez-Its. You know, like, are the extra toasted Cheez-Its making me happy or a happy person in sort of a holistic way? Like, no, but the experience of eating them brings me joy. The experience of, you know, perseverating on a song that I love brings me joy in a moment. Like joy feels like something that I can hold a little easier than sort of this broader sort of sense of being like a happy person, you know, because I just don't think that's sustainable for anyone, autistic people or neurotypical people, to kind of live with that as like the goal in sight.
Earlier, someone in the chat mentioned flow states. I think of joyfulness as sort of being in a flow state combined with a self-celebratory like experience. When I graduated from high school, that was a very joyful experience. I felt this flow state of, wow, I'm here and this is wonderful. I like this. For me, joy is very much tied in with this self-celebratory, moment celebratory, experience celebratory state.
Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next question here because I do want to make sure we can get to as many of them as possible. Is it possible to have joy in an area of difficulty? A person, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but a person shared their experience with singing and about how it will bring them sensory overload and that it can melt their balance and coordination, but that they still enjoy doing it anyway and they experience joy around that. Can you guys talk a little bit about that experience?
I'm having that experience right now. I get very overwhelmed and very anxious with public speaking, but I enjoy doing it. I usually afterwards have to do a lot of self-care, but like it is a very joyful experience to me to share and to have a platform to speak and to really get that input from other people and to be like, especially when I'm on a panel with other people, like talking, like that is such a joyful experience to me, but it's also overwhelming. Like it is absolutely common to feel overwhelmed by things that bring us joy. I have a daughter. I have an 8-month-old daughter. She brings me so much joy. But my God, do I need a break from her? Like, I think that's absolutely normal.
I think there's a lot of people who seek joy specifically because there's an element of discomfort involved, right? Like people jump off of buildings and go rock climbing and sail across the ocean because it brings them joy. But I think the danger or the sort of tension of that experience fuels joy sometimes as well. So I think it's totally normal, like Jay was saying, for things that bring you joy and make you happy to also be challenging. I think that's a part of the human experience. And same here. Like I love performing. It's something that I haven't done for a long time, but I'd really like to get back into it. And it's terrifying. Every time it's terrifying, standing in the wings or waiting, for your cue or whatever. It's scary, but that is part of the joy of it, is overcoming those obstacles and, putting yourself in a position that isn't super duper comfortable and then pursuing it anyway within what's safe for you to do, obviously. But yeah, I think it's really common for things that bring people joy to have an element of danger, perceived or otherwise.
I think what both of you just touched on was that the things in our lives that we put in attention and effort into are what like make us human. And I love, like, yeah, what both of you just said. I love the things that I love doing. I put work into them. And do you like putting in work? I mean, yes and no. It takes spoons, it takes energy, but that's what being alive is, and that as an expression of like being human is very much joyful to me, like being in that flow state I was defining earlier. And like just it's great. And you can very much transform suffering. It's not that like life doesn't have suffering, it's that you can touch it and transform it. A quote that I love, that I always find beautiful, is that like that hole in our like lives that we always try to fill is the space where the things about ourselves that we don't like are, that we're not looking at. And so if you look at them and like bring them in, even if it's uncomfortable, then you're full, you're whole, you're human. So yes, absolutely, joy in difficult moments.
Okay. Thank you guys all for your responses to these questions. Unfortunately, we were not able to make it to all of the questions because there were just so many of them. But all of the questions are really good, and I tried to pick ones that kind of encompassed as many of the answers as possible. I hope that everybody who came in enjoyed the panel today. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to close out the event. But thank you everybody so much for coming. We really appreciate you, and I'm so glad to be here with the panelists today. Thank you guys.
Thanks so much, Ryan, and thanks everyone. Ryan, could you do me a favor? Could you stop sharing your screen? Thank you. Perfect. Oh my gosh, that was so wonderful. Thank you, Jay and Mina and Bob and Ryan. So remarkable. Loved all the questions in the chat. Loved what you had to say. wrote down all kinds of things you said because they really resonated with me, and I think it was such an important and wonderful evening for all of us. Thanks to you. Before we close, I just wanted to share also how grateful I am, for our staff who are on today, and all our staff at AE&E. You got to meet 4 of them today on the panel, and you can see what a difference they make in the life of AE&E and for our community. And our staff in the past year have helped thousands of autistic individuals, their family members and professionals find the information, support, and community they're seeking. I also want to thank our board of directors, our committee members, our advisory groups, and all our other volunteers. AE&E is so much stronger because of our partnership and your leadership. And of course, thank you to all our community members who are here tonight, who provide feedback on our programs and services so we can continue to be responsive to your evolving needs and improve as an organization. AE&E is funded in part by donations from community members. If you want to support our work and you're able to, we really hope that you'll give to us at aene.org and just click the donate button. And lastly, I just want to say thank you all for joining us tonight. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at AE&E. In the chat, it's www.aene.org, and the contact us button at the top of the page. We're here for you all the time. Good night, everyone. Take care.